Welcome back to Beyond the Comfort Zone Talk and Shit with King-KAMBUF. Today uh, we are diving into a really fascinating piece of architectural and, frankly, political strategy. It's a document that, it really aims to define the blueprint for a sovereign future. It's called the KAMBUF National Building Design Command Brief and National Projects. More specifically, we're looking at the King-KAMBUF Studio Design Command Brief for the Nation of KAMBUF Project Investments.
It is a huge title, but what you realize, almost instantly when you start reading this document, is that it's the technical scaffolding for a massive political vision. This is not some abstract policy paper.
Yeah.
It's a stack of incredibly detailed, actionable instructions for architects, for engineers, basically telling them precisely how to build physical systems that are designed to enforce national sovereignty.
Absolutely. And the specific lens we're using for this deep dive, the studio theme of the day, is so crucial. It's agro-industrial food sovereignty systems. So our mission today is to really extract that strategic blueprint, the one for creating cooperative agriculture, processing, storage, and trade infrastructure. And it's not just for one place. It's across KAMBUF city-states and the diaspora economies. The focus is literally, and I'm quoting here, from soil to city. How do you make food the absolute non-negotiable foundation of freedom?
And that's what's so striking from the very first page. The stakes are immediately elevated. This brief just refuses to treat food security as, a simple problem of production or efficiency. No, it explicitly defines food as sovereign infrastructure, which means when the designers start thinking about integrated systems, they have to look at everything. Land rights, labor conditions, water management, energy, storage logistics.
Entire chain.
The entire chain.
Okay.
Industrial processing, market mechanics, and the policy frameworks that hold it all together. They all have to interlock. It's a demand for industrial-scale nourishment, sure, but one that's built for justice. It's designed specifically for the, let's face it, very complex needs of Africa and the African diaspora. So it's a systemic design solution that starts with the political economy, not just with the farm field.
Which brings us right to this core ethical question that seems to structure the entire brief. It's framed as the ultimate master challenge, and it's so direct. Who controls the food system? Who owns the land, the seed, the price? And then the big one, how do you use architecture and design to create countermodels? Models that mandate equity and resilience right from the foundation up.
Precisely, and that's what we're going to unpack. We're going to see how that big philosophical mandate becomes a concrete instruction. We'll see it in schemes for, say, designing national processing belts in Ghana, all the way to securing land trusts for Black farmers in the American South. This deep dive is really about connecting that highest level theory to the smallest architectural detail.
Okay, this is going to be good. Let's unpack this.
Okay.
So let's start with that core philosophy in section 1. Because it really feels like the non-negotiable starting point for everything else. The foundational strategic mandate is, it's stark, it's powerful. A nation that cannot feed itself is never free. To me, that sounds like a political and military doctrine just disguised as a design instruction.
It's a complete radical reframing of what national security even means. Think about it. If your access to basic sustenance, whether it's rice, fish, millet, cassava, whatever, if that access can be leveraged,
Right.
or just cut off by external global financial powers or, multinational corporations, then your political independence is conditional at best. It's an illusion.
It's a leash.
It's a leash. Exactly. So
Yeah.
the design brief directly counters this. It says the output, the thing that gets built, must be industrial scale nourishment with justice. The two are inseparable.
Okay, but here's my immediate challenge to that, and I think it's an important one. Industrial scale usually implies massive logistics, centralization, efficiency. And these are all elements that, historically have been leveraged by private capital for extraction. So how does this design approach, which is actively advocating for that industrial scale, successfully contrast itself with that romanticized idea of small-scale traditional farming, the kind of rural nostalgia that the brief itself warns against?
And that is the central paradox the brief is trying to solve. It does it by essentially reframing the definition of industrial. It explicitly rejects rural nostalgia, like you said. This isn't about going backward. It's about leveraging technology, logistics, and scale, all those powerful tools. But, and this is the absolute key, it's about embedding the ownership and the governance of those tools into cooperatives, into regional bodies, into the nation itself, rather than just allowing corporate capture to happen all over again.
So the scale's industrial, but the governance has to be sovereign and cooperative.
That's it. The power is in the structure, not just the size.
That makes a lot of sense. So with that in mind, what are the specific challenges the designs are required to dismantle? because the brief is so clear that the ethics have to lead the architecture, not the other way around.
Well, the designs are mandated to address 4 massive systemic failures that are basically inherited from history. First is post-colonial extraction, which means, resources flow out. Cash crops, raw materials. They leave the country, often leaving the local population short of processed, nutritious food.
They're exporting cocoa beans and importing chocolate bars.
Precisely, at a huge markup. The second failure is corporate capture. This is the capture of land, proprietary seeds, and markets. It effectively turns the farmer into a contracted laborer on their own land. They lose all their agency. Third, and this is the existential one, is climate injustice. It's the fact that climate change disproportionately devastates food systems in the global south through drought, through floods, through shifting seasons. The infrastructure has to be designed to withstand that reality.
And the fourth challenge, the one that's maybe the most immediate on a social level.
That's food apartheid. And the brief is careful here. We're not just talking about food deserts, which kind of implies a natural phenomenon. No. Food apartheid is the systemic denial of access to nutritious, affordable food based on race, class, and geography. So the architecture must actively work to reverse this. It has to design distribution and access points directly into marginalized urban and rural communities. The brief basically argues that a building, any building, that enables or ignores food apartheid is a fundamental architectural failure, no matter how functional or beautiful it is.
Wow. So the structures themselves, a processing plant, a market hub, a silo, they are intended to be physical institutional countermodels. They're spatial manifestations of a decolonial, anti-extractive economic system.
That's the ambition, absolutely. And, to really understand the weight of this food sovereignty mandate, you have to see it in the context of the larger KING-KAMBUF design portfolio. This isn't some standalone initiative they just came up with. It's the latest essential layer that's being integrated into a really comprehensive systemic vision of nation building that has been evolving for years.
All right, it connects to previous deep dives we've done. Let's briefly list some of those, just to give everyone the scope of this vision.
Sure. We've seen briefs before covering coastal rings and delta shields. That was all about protecting environmental borders and water access. We also looked at the blue-green water energy networks, which focused on resource management and resilience. Then, critically, there was the deep dive into digital and data sovereignty.
Securing the information infrastructure, which is so vital now.
Absolutely. And even the work on cultural and ritual infrastructure for building civic power and identity, the fact that agro-industrial food sovereignty is now placed squarely alongside these other foundational elements, it just demonstrates its non-negotiable strategic importance. It connects environmental protection with economic logistics and ultimately with cultural survival.
Yeah, it's the final proof that you can't have true data sovereignty or a stable coastline if your citizens are starving or, totally reliant on foreign imports for dinner. This brings us to section 2, and this is where, for me, it gets really interesting. It's the section on decoding the power chain. The studio demands that designers go through this interrogation of power structures using what they call a rotating master challenge. Theory ethics. It forces the designers to confront the political reality of food before they ever get to the drafting table.
That internal interrogation is the intellectual engine of the whole studio process. You have to identify the root of the problem. And the root is always an ethical and political structure, not a technical one. So you have to define that before you can even think about designing the solution. The 2 core questions they mandate are just ruthlessly sharp. First, who owns the land? And second, who controls seeds, storage, pricing, and trade? So if the final design doesn't structurally change the answer to those questions, if the land is still owned by speculators and the price is still set by some distant financial market, then the architectural project has, by its own definition, failed its core sovereign mandate.
That's the entire point. It's a pass-fail test. And it demands this systems-level analysis, which is formalized through something they call the 90 MIN concept block. This isn't just theory for a paper. It's a mandated 3-step critical process, one that ensures the theory is encoded directly into the brick and mortar, into the physical thing.
Okay, walk us through those 3 steps and focus on how this process forces the architecture itself to become political.
All right, step 1 is map the food power chain. So designers must literally visualize the entire flow, from how land is acquired, through the labor conditions on the farm, into the storage facilities, and then all the way to how price mechanisms are defined at the market. This visualization is meant to clearly show where power concentrates and, critically, where profit extraction occurs. Right, so if you draw this map and it shows that, say, 80% of the value of a crop disappears between the farm gate and the final market, then your design has to target the specific logistical or governance failure that's responsible for that loss.
Precisely. You've identified the wound. And that takes us to step 2. Identify ethical failures. This is where the designers have to pinpoint the specific mechanisms of injustice. Is it labor exploitation because of a lack of decent housing? Is it land dispossession because of weak or, predatory title laws? Is it price manipulation because of opaque commodity trading? This gives the design a precise, measurable social target to hit.
And then comes the architectural leap. Step 3. Encode counterpower into space and governance. This is the directive that demands the architecture itself resist the failure. But, and I want to push on this, how can a building truly encode counterpower? Isn't that fundamentally a legal or a policy problem?
It absolutely starts as a policy problem, but it becomes a spatial and technical solution. I'll give you an example. Let's say the ethical failure you've identified is labor exploitation on a new agro-industrial park. The design might then mandate that worker housing has to be integrated directly adjacent to the factory. They can't be miles apart. And you could add mandatory shared infrastructure, like a wastewater reuse system. This spatially links the factory's environmental health, its waste, directly to the workers' quality of life, which is the irrigation for their own food gardens. The architecture forces accountability by making the exploitation physically impossible to ignore or to offload somewhere else.
So the countermodel isn't a suggestion in a report somewhere. It's baked into the required design solution. They are designing for resilience, not just against storms or droughts, but against the extractive status quo itself. That's what makes this brief so compelling. It links that high-minded philosophy directly to the foundation work. All right, now we get to move from that high-level theory to the concrete architecture, Section 3, the 10 design schemes or portfolio drills. This is where we see the actual mechanisms of that counterpower being translated into physical space, from the continental scale all the way down to a single processing detail.
And you have to remember the structure here is incredibly rigorous. It's not a free-for-all. Every single one of these 10 schemes requires 6 specific components. You need a project type, a core challenge, the required deliverables, a public communication task, an implementation angle, and, maybe most importantly, those vital precedent studies, which have to include both successes and, crucially, failures or cautions. They are designing with a memory of past failures, which is so important.
Okay, let's start on the ground in West Africa with the first part, 3.1, securing the harvest. This seems to be about the core logistics challenge.
It is. The first scheme is in Ghana, a national agro-processing and storage belt along the Ashanti Northern Corridor. The critical challenge here is just the sheer volume of post-harvest loss. You have crops rotting in the field, being eaten by pests, or being dumped onto the market all at once, which crashes prices. This makes farmers deeply vulnerable to low, extremely volatile prices.
So the architectural solution is actually a strategic defense against market vulnerability. It's an economic weapon.
It's exactly that. The solutions mandate a full corridor master plan that's linked to the national rail system. That ensures that moving the product is efficient and cheap. They require detailed designs for these new processing hubs and, critically, technical detail on low-energy drying and storage systems. And that detail is key. The question is, how do we store millet or maize for 9 months without relying on massive, imported, often unreliable energy grids?
Right, so what does that look like?
It requires things like passive cooling, using the Earth's temperature. It means pest-resistant concrete formulations. It means optimized ventilation stacks that create airflow without fans. It's smart, resilient design.
And the metrics for success, they're not just economic, are they?
Not at all. They're ethical. The mandated ESG metrics are the quantifiable measure of justice. You have to measure the loss reduction percentage, yes, but more importantly, you have to measure the farmer income uplift. And the public communication task, the policy poster, encapsulates the whole strategy. Store power, not just crops.
I love that. Store power, not just crops.
It's perfect. And the precedent insight is honest. It notes the success of Ghana's One District One factory pilots. But it provides a crucial caution. Many of those projects stalled because of weak supply chain integration and poor governance. So the lesson is the physical design must integrate logistics and governance robustly from day one, or it will fail.
Okay, let's move to the coast. The next scheme is Senegal, a coastal fish processing and community cold chain network. The challenge here is twofold, right? It's foreign fleets overfishing.
Massive industrial overfishing, yes. And then spoilage of the local artisanal catch because there's just no cold storage.
So this project feels like pure spatial counterpower.
It is. The solutions require cooperative governance diagrams, which ensure the local fishers actually own and operate the facilities. That's paired with the physical processing plant design and, here's the kicker, the technical detail on solar ice production. That solar ice capability is the mechanism of sovereignty. It means the fisher doesn't have to rely on an external, often expensive, centralized energy grid to preserve their catch. They generate their own ice right there on the dock. They keep the value, they control their destiny.
It makes the fishers resilient and autonomous in a very tangible way.
And the precedent insight really emphasizes this tension. It says success exists in community processing initiatives in places like St. Louis. They prove the local capacity is there. But the critical caution is that ongoing industrial overfishing constantly undermines this local security. So the architectural design here has a political function. It has to serve as the institutional anchor for local advocacy against that massive foreign extraction.
Right. Next up, we have the unique demands of the Sahel region with the climate-resilient grain reserve network. This feels like it's about anticipating crisis. It's addressing drought cycles and conflict risk head-on.
And here, the strategy shifts from just-in-time efficiency to just-in-case redundancy. The solutions involve designing a network of distributed emergency grain silos rather than one huge, centralized megastructure. It spreads the risk. If one area is hit by conflict or drought, the others can still function. The construction detail here has to focus on pest-resistant construction, often using advanced concrete mixes, passive ventilation stacks, and specialized hermetic sealing to maintain the grain quality over long, dry periods without intensive chemical or energy input.
The logistics of something like that must be incredibly challenging, needing coordination across borders in different agencies.
They are. The implementation angle specifies the need for coordination between ECOWAS, the Economic Community of West African States, and humanitarian agencies. This is a high-stakes project designed for survival, and it comes with a profound caution. The politicization of food aid undermining trust. If the people see those storage facilities as being controlled by external, biased entities, the whole system fails. So the design has to be transparent, locally administered, and verifiable to maintain community trust in times of scarcity.
Finally, in this infrastructure block, we go to the Caribbean hurricane-resilient food storage and distribution nodes. The challenge here seems to be the absolute vulnerability of islands. You have high storm risk combined with really high import dependence.
This is a direct architectural response to climate reality. It's not theoretical. The solutions mandate an island network map, but then get very specific. Elevated warehouse sections to protect goods from storm surge, literally raising the entire inventory above the expected floodline. And then the required detail is on a wind-rated envelope.
Okay, for listeners who aren't architects, can you break that down? What does a wind-rated envelope mean in practice?
It means the exterior skin of the building, the walls, the roof, the doors, the windows, is designed and engineered to remain structurally integral against extreme hurricane force winds. It might require specialized steel connections, reinforced cladding, impact-resistant materials. The goal is simple. When the storm passes, the building is still standing and the food inside is safe and dry. And the precedent caution here warns against aid-dependent systems that collapse post-crisis. The KMBF design has to be intrinsically resilient. It must be operable autonomously immediately after a major event, not waiting for foreign ships to arrive a week later.
Okay, let's pivot now to Section 3.2. Because, sovereignty isn't just about the farm or the silo. It's about how food reaches the massive, dense city centers fairly and affordably. This section is called Justice in the Metropolis.
And we start with a big one, Nigeria, a Lagos regional food terminal and price stabilization market. I mean, Lagos is a megacity where food prices can be incredibly volatile. And the congestion and food waste are just endemic because of these inefficient, dispersed logistics chains.
So the solution is a centralized system, but one that frames logistics as a form of social justice. It calls for a metropolitan wholesale and cold chain mega hub.
Yeah, and we are talking about massive infrastructure here. The deliverables include market logistics diagrams, a full cold storage section with complex ventilation systems, and modular vendor infrastructure. The goal is efficiency, yes, but that efficiency is directly linked to social outcomes. By streamlining the supply chain and ensuring there's enough cold storage, you dramatically reduce spoilage and you cut out unnecessary, often predatory middlemen. And that directly stabilizes prices for the average person buying food.
And the ESG metrics they demand, a measurable food waste decrease and a price volatility decrease, they show that stability is the core performance indicator.
Absolutely. The precedent insight points to places like Rungus Market in Paris for its logistical brilliance. But, and this is so important, the caution is localized specifically to Lagos. It warns that top-down market relocations have historically disrupted informal livelihoods, destroying the economic security of thousands of small vendors. So the new hub has to be designed to integrate and elevate, not just bulldoze and destroy, the existing ecosystem of traders and distributors.
Next, we have Ethiopia, an integrated agro-industrial park plus worker housing. This one tackles the ethical challenge of rapid industrialization head-on, labor justice, and environmental impact.
This is a perfect example of architecture enforcing that closed-loop accountability we talked about earlier. The design mandates a district plan that integrates the factory, the logistics hub, and the worker housing. They cannot be spatially segregated. It's a requirement. They require specific detail on the factory housing interface and, crucially, a technical detail on wastewater reuse for irrigation.
Tell me more about that wastewater detail as a political mechanism. It sounds technical, but it feels political.
It is entirely political. Think it through. If the factory needs clean water for its processing, and then its own processed effluent is required to irrigate the crops that feed its workers and the nearby city, then the factory is structurally, economically incentivized to clean its water properly, rather than just dumping pollution into a river. The architecture forces a reciprocal relationship. The factory's waste output becomes the farm's vital input. And while models like the UNIDO parks offer some organizational success, the caution is always the huge risk of worker exploitation without strong labor standards. And critically, without that spatial integration that gives workers agency and visibility, you can't hide the problems.
Right. And finally, for this urban block, we have the Urban Infill Challenge in South Africa, a township food manufacturing cooperative. This one seems to address food deserts and unemployment directly within marginalized urban areas.
This is all about localized economic counterpower. It's pushing back against the idea that townships must be merely residential areas totally dependent on distant food supply chains. The solutions involve an infill site plan for light industrial use combined with a retail space, and a very specific detail on shared equipment systems.
How do those shared equipment systems help? What's the mechanism there?
Well, by providing shared high-cost equipment like industrial ovens or mixers or small-scale packaging machinery, the cooperative dramatically lowers the barrier to entry for local entrepreneurs. You're democratizing access to the means of production. You're building small-scale manufacturing capacity right where the consumers live. The worker cooperative model provides the precedent for success, but the caution highlights a really common failure: market access. Simply producing the food isn't enough. The design has to be connected to strong distribution networks to reach beyond the immediate neighborhood, otherwise it just stagnates.
Okay, section 3.3. This feels vital. We're moving into the deepest philosophical territory here. It's about control of the very building blocks of the food system, our land and our seeds, reclaiming heritage.
First up is Kenya, a seed sovereignty research and storage campus. The challenge here is the acute and growing threat of corporate seed dependence. This is where farmers get locked into purchasing patented, often non-replicable seed varieties, which erodes genetic diversity and their own economic freedom.
So this is literally a design project focused on protecting the genetic commons. What are the required architectural elements for this kind of genetic defense?
The deliverables are fascinating. They include the design of an indigenous seed bank, modern research labs, a climate-controlled vault section, and a really important technical detail on passive cooling seed storage. The architecture is, in essence, a fortress for genetic self-defense.
Passive cooling feels like more than just a technical solution here. Why is it so strategically important for seed storage?
Because the long-term viability of these heritage seeds depends entirely on stable, specific cold and dry conditions. If that stability relies on a fragile, high-energy supply chain or on imported refrigerants and generators, then the seed vault itself is vulnerable to climate chaos or supply chain disruption, the very thing it's trying to protect against. Passive cooling using thermal mass, underground storage, and optimized airflow chimneys makes the genetic preservation intrinsically resilient. It's independent. It secures the seeds against both political and environmental instability. And while the precedent insight supports community seed banks, the caution is critical: biopiracy and the IP capture of indigenous genetics. The campus has to be designed to legally and spatially safeguard those seeds from any form of external commercial exploitation.
Now we turn to the diaspora focus, which is a foundational mandate for KMBF. This is the African American South Regional Food Sovereignty and Land Trust Hub. The challenge here is profound and historical.
Yeah.
Land dispossession.
And this project directly connects architecture to the challenge of reparative justice. It's not just about food. The required deliverables are a blend of legal and physical infrastructure. They require Black Farmer Land Trust diagrams, which is the governance structure for shared permanent ownership, alongside the physical processing barn section, and a detail on the adaptive reuse of rural structures.
Let's define the specific threat that the land trust is designed to defeat. The brief mentions heirs' property laws. I think many of our listeners might not realize the severity of this legal mechanism.
It is a devastatingly effective mechanism for generational wealth loss. When land is passed down from generation to generation without a clear probated will, the ownership becomes fractional among all living heirs. Any single heir, no matter how distant or disconnected from the land, can petition a court for what's called a partition sale. This forces the entire property to be sold at public auction, often way below market value. It destroys family ownership and allows land speculators to just scoop up the parcels for pennies on the dollar. The land trust design is meant to legally secure the land permanently against this threat by taking it out of that system.
So the physical architecture, the processing barn, the community center, it serves as the economic engine that reinforces the legal stability of the land trust.
Exactly. It makes the land economically viable and politically visible. It gives people a reason to fight for it. The Precedent Insight references the incredible enduring strength of organizations like the Federation of Southern Cooperatives, but the profound caution is clear. Heirs' property laws are the primary mechanism accelerating land loss in the Black South today. So the design brief demands a solution where the architecture works in direct concert with governance to reverse generations of systemic extraction.
And so we arrive at the Apex project, the final scheme, 3.4, the Continental Food Exchange and Commodity Ethics Center. This project seems to address the core political and theoretical conflict head-on. How do you balance the necessity of large-scale trade with the mandate of ethical, fair pricing? How do you stop financial speculation from overriding basic human needs?
This is the moment the entire vision is institutionalized at the continental scale. The goal here is to design a transparent market mechanism that actively tames pure extractive financialization of food.
The solutions listed are high-level and institutional. A flagship institution to regulate fair trade, a design for an exchange hall section, and this specific detail on public price visibility architecture. That sounds like a very deliberate attempt to use design to force transparency.
That's exactly what it is. The public price visibility architecture is the ultimate design weapon against opaque speculation. You could imagine massive, transparent screens inside and outside the building displaying the verified costs of production for different crops, the mandated fair price floor for farmers, and real-time verified market data. It makes the mechanics of trade transparent to every single observer and forces fair trade regulations to be visible, not hidden in some backroom deal.
So the idea is that the physical design of the trading floor itself becomes an ethical enforcement mechanism.
It creates a constant, unavoidable ethical reminder for the traders. The implementation for this is, of course, incredibly ambitious. It would require funding from a sovereign fund and intense African Union coordination. The precedent successes are other transparent commodity exchanges, but the key caution is acute. It's the constant danger of financialization disconnecting food from people, the risk of allowing traders to forget that the number they are moving on a screen represents a farmer's livelihood or a family's next meal. The architecture must constantly work to inject that human cost back into the financial transaction.
This command brief is clearly not just a stack of ideals. It is a rigorous set of action instructions. So let's transition into Section 4 and examine the process itself, the design method and measurable impact.
The rigor is immediately evident in the clear division of labor they set up. Designers have to choose between a short study, which is 60 to 90 minutes, and that focuses on the more localized site-specific schemes like the Senegal fishery or the African American South Land Trust, or they can choose a long commission, which is 180 minutes, for the really complex trans-border systemic projects like the Ghana Corridor or the Continental Exchange. This ensures you get a focused, high-intensity output regardless of the time available.
And the required deliverables are so specific. They demand that abstract theory be tied to tangible, verifiable results. What exactly has to come out of that 90-min drawings and details block?
It's very prescriptive. They are required to produce one clear plan and one long section. That's the comprehensive overview of the spatial solution. Then, and this is crucial, they need one processing or storage detail. That's the single technical element, be it the solar ice machine or the passive cooling vault, that ensures resilience, the key innovation.
But the element that links everything back to that ethical core is the requirement for annotated ESG and ethics metrics. So the architecture has to be literally labeled with its social impact performance.
Exactly. You don't just show the building's structure, you have to show the measurable outcome of that structure right on the drawing. And this all feeds into the final presentation, which requires 4 expected boards. Board 1 is the food system theory diagram, that's the Y mapping the power chain. Board 2 is the spatial proposal, that's the physical building. Board 3 is the section in detail, that's the how, the technical execution. And board 4 is governance and delivery, that's the who and, critically, how you're going to pay for it. A design is considered structurally incomplete if the governance mechanism isn't visualized right alongside the building plans.
That just makes the ethical mandate completely non-negotiable.
Mm.
And to ensure there's consistent accountability across all these different projects, the brief mandates 4 specific portfolio tags under ESG. And these have to be addressed in every single project, regardless of its scale.
These 4 tags are the definition of success for KING-KAMBUF. Every design must enhance nutrition, that's quality and access. It must ensure labor justice, fair conditions, fair pay, decent housing. It must increase resilience, both to climate shocks and to market instability. And it must mandate equity, which means fair ownership and access for all. Success is fundamentally defined by these ethical metrics, not solely by capital return. It's a design brief where the social performance is the ultimate structural requirement of the building. So when you take a step back, what does this all mean? I think the overarching lesson from this KING-KAMBUF agro-industrial food sovereignty systems brief is that food security, when you approach it as an issue of sovereignty, is a comprehensive design challenge, one that operates across every conceivable scale and every political boundary.
We've seen the scope demonstrated perfectly in this deep dive, from the most, minute technical detail, like a passive cooling system that protects indigenous seeds in Kenya, all the way up to the trans-border governance mechanisms you need for a regional rail corridor in West Africa. It shows that design is intervention. It's the physical manifestation of political will.
The architects and engineers being given this brief are being tasked with moving way beyond just aesthetic design. They have to engage directly with the political economy of nourishment. They're being asked to design systems that stabilize the future by structurally resisting the very forces of financialization and extraction that define the colonial and post-colonial past.
And that brings us perfectly to the KING-KAMBUF closing directive, which really encapsulates the entire ethos of this deep dive into sovereignty. I'm just going to read it. Food is not a commodity alone. It is culture, labor, land, and survival. Divine systems that feed the people first, that reward the farmer, that resist extraction, that stabilize the future. This is KING-KAMBUF. Build sovereignty you can eat.
It's a powerful synthesis of ideology and pure pragmatism.
It really is. And it leaves us with a final provocative thought for you, the listener, to explore. And it builds directly on that flagship commodity ethics center we discussed. So, if public price visibility architecture using transparent screens and data feeds within a trading hall can be strategically designed to reduce financial speculation and mandate transparency, what other common mundane architectural elements could be redesigned to enforce justice? Think about the spaces you interact with every day. Warehouses, local distribution centers, even the delivery routes that trucks take through your city. How can the physical space of commerce be architecturally manipulated to resist corporate capture and mandate measurable metrics of, say, labor justice or equity?
Well, you could imagine, for instance, if the loading docks of a national distribution center were designed in such a way that the only efficient entry and exit routes were physically controlled by a workers' cooperative governance body located right there. The very design of the building itself could become a lock against illicit or extractive labor practices. That's the power of spatial counterpower. It's using choke points in the architecture to enforce ethics.
Food for thought indeed. We've just opened the door to this command brief. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the blueprint of sovereignty.
Until next time.